Hi, I'm Emily Almeda-Lopez, and welcome to the polling place survey training portion of this Rev Up event. Um, with me is Tom Murphy from Disability Law Center, and we'll be walking you through everything that you'll need to know to be a volunteer surveyor for polling places. And if you're just here to learn about the accessibility issues around polling places, that's okay too. So I'll be sharing my screen in just a minute, and then Tom can take it away with his portion.
Thanks, Emily. While you're getting that up, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Tom Murphy, and I'm a supervising attorney at Disability Law Center. I'm a white male in my 50s. I have no hair and a beard, and I use he, him pronouns. My background is primarily a white wall. So, as Emily noted, we're going to take you through the general steps to follow in assessing a polling place for accessibility. You can go to the next slide, Emily. Emily will be working the PowerPoint, so I'll need to prompt for slides. Just by way of quick background, TLC works to protect the legal rights of individuals with disabilities. We're the protection and advocacy system for Massachusetts. And that means that we have federal authority to monitor and investigate alleged abuse and neglect of people with disabilities anywhere where they live or receive services, and also advocate for the civil rights of people with disabilities. So, next slide, please. As I just covered a little bit of our background. One of the sources of federal authority and funding that we have is to advocate for the legal rights of individuals with disabilities with respect to the voting process. That is known as our PAVA program. And it is through that program that we organize this event, but also help to ensure that the process of voting is equally accessible for people with disabilities as it is for people without. Next slide. So just very quickly, a couple of the laws that apply to polling place accessibility. There is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which requires that public entities ensure that people with disabilities can access and use voting facilities. And that's under Title II of the ADA, which applies to state and local governments. The ADA allows for the use of temporary measures to provide access to polling places on election day, but that doesn't completely eliminate a public entity's obligation to ensure that its programs and services and activities are accessible to people with disabilities. And it also doesn't mean that a polling place or a public location can continue to be inaccessible going forward in perpetuity. It just means that if necessary, on a temporary basis, the use of measures to alleviate accessibility concerns can be implemented. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go through the specifics. But just keep in mind that there may be some temporary measures that you would see in place at a polling place, such as temporary parking space or something like that, depending on the location and the layout. Next slide. So under the Help America Vote Act, there is also legislation which requires that there be a voting system in place at all polling places, which is accessible for individuals with disabilities, including visual accessibility. for individuals who are visually impaired in a manner that provides the same opportunity for access and participation in the voting process as for other voters. And municipalities can satisfy this requirement through the use of at least one direct recording electronic voting system or other voting system which is equipped for individuals with disabilities at each polling place. So as Bridget Murphy was talking about, in Massachusetts, we use the AutoMark machine. And that has been in place for almost about 2 decades now. So that will be one thing that we'll ask you to be looking for in your polling place surveys in terms of making sure that there is an AutoMark machine which is usable and operable in each of the locations. Next slide. So in terms of surveying a polling place, we certainly don't expect that each individual that undertakes this will become an accessibility expert, either just by participating in this training, or that you already have the knowledge or background to be an expert at physical accessibility, or that you will gain that knowledge between now and the day that you're doing a survey. What we do ask is that you have a general knowledge of the issues that you'll be looking for, and that you think through in advance some of the steps that you will go through, that you would go through if you were going to vote. So that would include anything from beginning with parking, to the pathway to a polling place, to the entrance, to the interior routes, the voting area, voting equipment, and the exits. So a lot of this is based on common sense. Next slide. So starting in the parking lot, does the parking lot meet the minimum number of handicap spots that are required? And that would be 1 for 25 spaces. Are there visible elevated signs about 5 to 8 feet off the ground, marking that there is a handicap spot? The handicap spaces should be 8 feet wide and have a 4-foot access aisle. The parking area should be clear and reasonably lit, flat, clear of gravel, mud, etc. If there's no parking lot available, there should be at least one on-street parking space, which is temporarily designated as a handicap parking space for the election in front of the polling place. So there may be polling places where there is not a parking lot. There should be at least one designated accessible space. You want to be on the lookout for adequate designation of that space as the accessible parking location, for signage from that space to the polling location, and for a path of travel, which is accessible. Keep in mind also that the polling place entrance may not be the main entrance to the building. So for instance, a school may have a polling place which is located in a gymnasium, which has a separate entrance from the main entrance to the school. If that is the case, think about accessible parking being close to the entrance to the actual polling place location. And if there is not permanent accessible parking there, then again, there should be a temporarily designated space, which is near the polling place entrance. Think about whether there is a drop-off area, which is accessible. Again, the main entrance to the building may have a drop-off area which is accessible, but if they're using a separate or different entrance for the polling location, you'll want to look for whether or not the drop-off area for that location is accessible. And if necessary, look for whether there is temporary parking, which is in close proximity to the entrance to the polling place. Again, the permanent accessible parking for the building may be located near the main entrance to the building. If there is a separate entrance being used for the polling place, think about whether there is parking which is in close proximity to that, which could be designated as accessible on election day. Next slide, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Before we move away, we do have one question on a parking lot measurement. Kathy wanted to know what side of the line are we measuring to get the 8 feet? Is it the inner side to get the width?
Yes, I believe you're asking. I'm sorry, if you could clarify the question.
I'll read it. Sorry, I should read it. For measuring the width of parking, do you measure from the outer part of the line or the inside edge of the line?
Of the stripe itself.
Mm-hmm.
I believe you would be measuring from the outside, so that from outside the line to outside the line would be at least 8 feet.
Great, that's the only one so far.
Okay, we can move on to the next slide, please, Emily. So again, just quickly, the 1 in 25 ratio. This is for the number of accessible parking spaces which are required. And this chart just shows you how that plays out. So if there are up to 25 total parking spaces, then at least one needs to be designated as accessible. At least one of the accessible spaces also needs to be van accessible. So you'll be taking those measurements, and Emily will take you through that as we go through the survey document itself. Now, again, we're not necessarily asking that you count every space in the parking lot. But this is to give you a general sense of what is required. And if your polling location that you're surveying does have a large parking lot that appears to have 100 or more spaces in it, and there is only 1 or 2 designated accessible spaces, then that's something that we would ask that you make note of, that we may want to follow up on. Next slide, please. So again, thinking through the process that you would go through if you're going to the location to vote, there would be parking first, and then the next step in that process would be getting from the parking lot to the building. So this involves pathways and sidewalks that are part of that route, and we want to be making sure that these routes are accessible. So the first thing that you would want to look for is a curb ramp from the parking area, from the accessible parking space, up onto the sidewalk if there is a raised sidewalk. And there you want to be making sure that the curb ramp is at least 36 inches wide and has a slope of no more than 1 in 12. What that means is 1 inch of rise for every 12 inches of length. So if the height that the ramp needs to get up to from the ground up onto the curb is 3 inches, then the ramp itself needs to be at least 3 feet. So it's 1 foot of length of ramp for each inch of rise. You want to make sure that the surface is stable slip resistant, that it's generally either going to be concrete or asphalt. There are no cracks, there are no visible breaks in it, that the surface itself is clear, and that there doesn't appear to be any damage or anything that could impede a wheelchair from safely getting up the ramp. You want to make sure that there are no gaps that are greater than a half-inch in any surface in any of the direction of travel that a person would be taking. So anything, any rise or lip that is more than half an inch does need to have at least some sort of temporary ramp or some other measure to make sure that person who is using a wheelchair can get over that lip, or that a person who is using a cane doesn't have the ability to have their cane get stuck in it. You also want to make sure there are no sudden drops more than 1/4 of an inch. And again, anything that is a sudden change in level needs to be beveled, or there needs to be some sort of temporary measure in place to make sure that that is alleviated. The path to the accessible entrance to the building should be clearly marked and well lit, and at least 36 inches wide. You want to generally make sure that the path of travel is the same or at least substantially similar in terms of distance for anyone who is entering the polling place. And if applicable, if there is public transportation that is available to or near the polling place, make sure that the path of travel from the public transportation to the entrance to the polling place is accessible based on all of these same factors. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit more of a sense of what a ramp should look like, or the parameters that a ramp should be following. Again, 1 in 12 is the maximum running slope that any ramp should have. There should be firm handrails on both sides. The handrails should be fixed and should extend from the bottom of the ramp all the way to and just beyond the landing area at the top of the ramp. It's probably unlikely that you would see a situation where there would be a very long ramp, but in the event that there is, there should be intermediate landing areas if the ramp exceeds 30 inches in terms of the ride. So every 30 feet in terms of the rise. So every 30 feet for a ramp that is long, there should be a landing area, a flat surface, so that a person who's using a wheelchair does not have to be going up a rise, which is more than 30 feet long, without having the ability to stop on a flat surface and rest. The ramp itself should be at least 48 inches wide. And in the event that there is a non-permanent ramp, a portable ramp being used, it should be as close to that 1 in 12 ratio, 8.3% of slope as possible, and also have handrails on both sides. So if there's a non-permanent or portable ramp in place that either doesn't have handrails or that is excessively steep in terms of the slope, then that's something that we definitely would ask that you make note of. Next slide, please. So then the building entrances. You want to take a look at the handles or the hardware that is required to use in order to open the door. You You want to make sure that they can be operated with a closed fist so that a person can avoid the necessity for tight grasping, pinching, or twisting of the hardware to open the door. The doorway itself should have at least 32 inches of clear width, and thresholds should not be higher than a ½ inch above the floor. Again, that's the lip that you might encounter when you're going across the threshold of a doorway. You want to make note of the door opening force. We're not going to ask you to measure that specifically, but in the event that there is a closed door that appears to require a great deal of force in order to be opened, it may be necessary for the door to just be propped open permanently, so that a person with a disability does not have difficulty independently opening the door. And or at the very least, it's possible that there may need to be a poll worker who is assigned to be at the door to make sure that they can assist someone who needs help in opening it. If the main entrance to the building itself is not accessible, which may be the case, that there may be an accessible entrance which is not the main entrance, then there should be adequate signage to direct people to the accessible entrance. And if that is the case, then the accessible entrance should be unlocked and should be able to be used without assistance by a person with a disability throughout the hours that the polling place is open. Next slide, please, Emily. So this is just a slide to give you some examples of hardware. Again, we're not asking necessarily that you be familiar with all of the different types of accessible hardware that may be available, but this can give you an idea of the types of issues that we want you to look out for to make sure that a person can operate a door independently without excessive grasping, pinching, or twisting. So just keep some of these things in mind, and again, consider as you are looking at a polling place, if there is potentially a difficulty or a problem that a person would encounter in independently opening a door, consider asking that the door be propped open. Next slide, please. So the interior, getting from the entrance to the building to the polling location, there must be an accessible route, which is at least 48 inches, which has at least 48 inches of turnaround space for a person in a wheelchair. The route itself should be at least 36 inches wide, and should be the same one that's used by the general public. And then the main thing that you'll want to be looking for in terms of an accessible route is protruding objects. We want to make sure, especially that a person who is using a cane will be able to detect any objects that are protruding out from the walls. So generally anything that is above 27 inches, which is sort of the height at which a cane would be able to detect something that is protruding, can only project out a maximum of 4 inches. You also want to be looking at steepness of an interior route. There may be, some instances where a hallway is not completely flat. And if you encounter that, try to take a measurement. If there is a slope which is greater than 1 in 20, then there should be a ramp. It should be the requirements of a ramp should be met, especially that there be handrails that are available. Next slide, please. So again, in terms of protruding objects or obstructions, things to keep lookout for, a lot of schools are used as polling locations. So there might be drinking fountains, things like coat racks, fire extinguishers, display cases. These are all things which could be sort of sticking out into a hallway. Open staircases would be a danger for someone who is using a cane, because they would not be able to detect that there is a stairway which they could be walking into. And so again, keep an eye out for things like this. If they exist, there should be warnings which are detectable with a cane. Generally cones will suffice. But something that is lower than 27 inches, placed in front of anything which is protruding, would be sufficient to warn someone who's using a cane. There's a question: can people call ahead if they need assistance or help navigating these entrances? I guess it's possible that someone could. Certainly, someone can request assistance once they arrive at a polling place. In terms of calling ahead, I think it would depend on the location itself, and whether there is, some sort of whether there would be some number to call and somebody who is reachable. But generally speaking, a person with a disability can ask for assistance with any of the issues that they may encounter while they're voting. And again, just like on the outside, if there's an accessible route within the building, which is different from the main route that others are using to vote, then make sure that there is adequate directional signage to make sure that a person with a disability knows, where the accessible route is. Next slide, please. The voting area itself should have plenty of space for a person with a disability to be able to maneuver. So a person who uses a wheelchair needs to have at least 48 inches of clear turnaround space. So you'll want to ask yourself when you're in this environment, can a person with a mobility impairment move about freely? Or is the furniture, is the equipment too packed in, too close together, so that a person might be impeded in terms of their ability to independently move about. You'll want to make sure, again, that there is at least one accessible voting machine, that the tables or the station on which the voting machine and other voting equipment is located is at an adequate height to accommodate a wheelchair user, so at least 34 inches high. Again, that there is clear signage which directs voters to the polling station, protruding objects, which we've talked about, and possibly a place to sit for someone if they're waiting in line, say, to check in or something like that. You'll want to make sure that there are potential accommodations in place for someone to be able to participate in the entire voting process, which could take time if there are lines or other issues that they may encounter in terms of the time that it's going to take to vote. Next slide, please. In terms of the voting equipment, there should be a sample ballot posted on the wall that's no higher than 48 inches above the floor. With paper ballots, there should be at least one marking shelf that provides enough clear space under it so that a person with a wheelchair can independently use that space. Voting machines must have at least one sample ballot posted at not higher than 48 inches. And any levers that are required to manipulate voting equipment should be no higher than 48 inches above the floor. And again, as Emily takes you through the survey instrument, all of these issues will be there as well. The next slide, please. We've talked about the AutoMark voting machine. You'll want to make sure that it is readily available and accessible to voters, that staff have been trained. It's a good idea sometimes to just talk to the poll workers that are there, and pick their brains a little bit. Make sure that they understand what the AutoMark voting machine is, what it's there for, and that they know how to use it. There should be a privacy shield. The machine should be set up in a location which allows for independent and private voting. And in fact, a person with a disability or anyone who's using the AutoMark machine should have the same level of privacy that any other voter has. So that's something that we've seen, where the machine is set up in such a way that it can be easily seen by other people who are in the polling place. And if you notice that, you'll want to ask that the setup be changed so that a person can vote privately. Next slide, please. Finally, I just want to mention, reasonable accommodations are available as well. So we're talking about, things that may go beyond physical accessibility issues, but more along the lines of modifying policies and practices for a person with a disability so that they can vote independently. So things like giving someone a chair to sit down if they're standing in a long line, allowing service animals, allowing a person with a disability to have someone with them to assist them in the voting process, to go with them and be with them while they're voting. These are all types of accommodations, I think pretty straightforward. But again, things that you may want to, if you're chatting with some of the poll workers, you want to kind of bring up just to make sure that they're aware that accommodations like this need to be made for someone so that they can vote independently. Next slide, please. So I think that takes us to a demonstration of the AutoMark machine, and I think Emily is going to pick it up here.
Yeah, let me see in terms of how we're doing on time. This is a video on how to use the AutoMark machine. It's a little outdated, but it is the most current video that we had. It still will work fine in terms of how to use the actual machine. And I think that given the amount of time we have, I will make this available in the chat for people who want to learn the specifics of how to use the AutoMark. It's fairly intuitive, but I'm just gonna keep things moving. I can always, if necessary, link it in the chat for people to see. And I will move down to the next slide. So just some basic things to remember when doing a survey. If you need to take any pictures of, say, a broken sidewalk or some other issue that you need to have photographic evidence of, if there's some kind of problem, make sure that if you do take pictures, there are no other people in them. We want to maintain everybody's privacy at the polls. So just take pictures of whatever the issues are. Don't take pictures of any other people. Before you start surveying, check in with whoever's in charge of the polling place. Just let them know, hey, I'm here to check out accessibility issues for the polling place. I'm a volunteer with the Disability Law Center or with RevUp, and I'm just here to make sure that the polling place is accessible. And again, if you take a picture of an issue, try and get multiple angles of picture and make sure that the pictures are decent quality so that we can see everything that's going on. And anything relevant you observe um, for use in the survey in terms of accessibility, make sure that you take notes, just so that you can remember afterwards everything that you saw. And if anything's really time sensitive, like people actively are can't vote or are having huge issues with that, with any kind of accessibility problem, um, please either call the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office at this number, 1-800-462-8683, or call my personal number at
Mm.
617-221-8451, and feel free to report that issue. Um, and then any tools that you might need. Um, So, a tape measure, or at least some way to consistently measure things. Um, if you really can't bring a tape measure or like a or something like that, I have seen people improvise ways to measure, um, especially for things like ramps that require ratios. As long as you have a consistent thing to measure against, then you can kind of improvise it. Like, oh, it measures this many lengths this way and this many that way. If you really have to, but preferably you'd have some kind of tape measure. Um, a phone, a camera, any way to take pictures. If there's some kind of issue, something's broken, um, or something is blocked off, we want pictures of those so that we can remedy the issue. Um, a copy of the polling site checklist that's available online at Disability Law Center, um, on the voting rights page, I believe. Um, and That's optional, but it might be good to have that on hand just so you kind of have like almost a physical copy of the survey that you can look over in case you can't pull it up on your phone. Um, the digital bubbler level and the door pressure gauge really aren't necessary. It's more of just a fancier way of getting the slopes and telling if a door is too heavy. And obviously, a way to take notes on the polling sites that you're looking at. Um, you'll want to have some kind of way to take notes. And That's about it in terms of necessary equipment. In terms of the online survey, it's available at this URL. So you just want to click this link on a tablet or a phone, and follow the directions. And like Tom said, you want to start on the outside and work your way in, and just look for any issues that you would normally look for in terms of as you go through in terms of like what could be a problem. Can I pull up real quick? Is it still sharing this? Can people see?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, awesome. I was wondering if that trick would work. So this is what the web page looks like. There's a quick reminder here to do one survey per polling place, and pictures are only necessary if you find some kind of problem. So you want to enter in your name. The organization part's not really necessary unless you're working for a specific group. If you're just an individual surveyor, you don't need you can just put in none. You want to enter in the address of the polling place you're in and the city. Massachusetts is already filled out for you. You want to write in the name of the place, and then ward and precinct. If you know that information ahead of time, you'll want to enter it in. And then here is just a series of bubbles that you go through to say whether it's a school, a fire station, a house of worship, a community center, um, a city or town hall, residential housing, or some other type. And then you also need to fill in whether it's a consolidated voting site, which means it has two or more precincts attached to it. The people running the polling site will usually know that information. And then here you see we go through site access and parking, and it's basically a copy of the requirements that Tom mentioned in the training for all of these. So you'll just go down through and answer those questions to the best of your ability. Um, and then here is where you would generally upload any pictures. It says path of travel here, but you can also upload other pictures that you come across. Um, And then here's the other parking lot information with the ratio with the every 25 additional thing that Tom mentioned. Um, and yeah, you just basically go through this and fill out all the steps that Tom mentioned. It's pretty comprehensive. It's not actually as complicated as it looks. It's mostly just a series of bubbles and stuff. Um, if you don't know if you can't get exact measures, try your best on it. Um, and there's always the option to fill out commentary as best you can. And then towards the bottom here, there's this number of polling machines thing. And then down here it says all elements compliant. That's where you would write out any problems that you see that to kind of expand on any problems that you have. It's a pretty easy to use form fillable thing. And then temporary measures used, like is anything that can basically be used to quickly fix problems. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then you just hit submit and it goes both into storage to be analyzed later and then directly to my email address. So I'll see any problem as soon as people submit the survey. Um, and I will be keeping my eye out for that for people who want to go out and do this process. So if we go back to here, um, again, this is just some quick temporary fixes that you can do in case there's certain problems that you might run into. So obviously, if a door is not accessible, um, it's easy enough to have the door be wedged open or held in place with some kind of door stop. Um, Signs and traffic cones can be used to make temporary accessible parking if there isn't any. It can also be used to guide people away from anything hazardous if they have vision needs. Like Tom said, anything that's protruding or sticking out, you can put cones or other blocking things to make sure that people don't get injured on that. And then if there's any issue that might need a ramp, temporary ramps are pretty easy to do. The Secretary of State's office and the ADA guidelines that are available on the DLC voting rights webpage other has some tips on how to find accessible ramps and stuff. They do for if you tell a polling place official that they need a temporary ramp, they're pretty easy to improvise, and also they can be gotten pretty readily built for purpose from like Home Depot and other hardware stores. And then temporary signs are easy enough to make and just write down to direct voters to accessible routes. And just something as simple as a piece of paper or cardboard can be used to improvise privacy shields when it comes to using the AutoMark machine or covering up ballots. Uh, so any further questions? I actually, until I stop sharing, I can't see if we have any in chat.
We do. We
So
do
cool.
have. So Brianna wants to know, when is the best time to survey a polling place? Should this be done on the day of election or day of before? And I feel like I can answer this question a little, but Emily, maybe someone else can answer it better than me.
You can give your best shot, and I can supplement as needed.
Okay. So this is just based on one round of special elections in the Massachusetts House of Representatives that I surveyed a few schools in the Center Street corridor of Jamaica Plain, and it was before the special election, and our access is severely limited when it's not election day. So all of that interior work I wasn't able to do because even though it's a public-ish place, I didn't have access to inside. I didn't have access to where they would stage the polling location. The other thing that should be kept in mind for election day auditing is go to your own polling place and you can actually ask to test the auto mark yourself. You can't do that at any other polling location because I'm pretty sure they'll flag it for fraud.
Yeah, in general, the easiest thing to do in terms of the surveying is to go to your own polling place on election day. You'll encounter the least amount of the least problems if you want to do that. Um, if you want to take on more polling places and really make sure places in your area are accessible, the easiest thing to do is mostly do the outside steps, um, like looking at all of the parking place stuff and the entrances. That's also what's mostly going to be set up if you do it before the day of, because you can always check to see if the externals are accessible and up to code. Um, you can try asking folks if you can survey the interior of a polling place that is not yours, but that does sometimes come with complications. So it's usually easiest to do your own polling place and then do the externals of any other polling places you want to do. And of course, on election day is when you're going to see it really set up. Even for the external part, there might be temporary parking places that aren't otherwise designated. Um, there might be other things to take a look at. So that wouldn't necessarily be set up the same way, or pathways that aren't designated properly other times of year. So doing it on election day is best, and doing it at your own polling site is going to be easiest. But if you do want to extend yourself out and do other polling sites, then it's safest and easiest to just do the externals of those. And outside of election day, it's going to be easiest to just do the externals. That'll still give us valuable information for anything else. In terms of that survey, since there is a lot of information on it, and some of it might not always be relevant, you can just hit other or type in NA for things like that. It would still be very helpful to us to know which building exteriors are an issue. And yes, that's a very good issue to bring up, Rick. Make sure when you look at accessible parking that people who are actually parked there have some kind of placard or indicator that they are eligible to use those parking spots, because sometimes poll workers or other people will park in the accessible parking spaces, which is an irritant on any given day and not very thoughtful on any given day, but is especially a problem on election days, because somebody that's taking up a spot that somebody might need to park there to vote. Um, and yeah, if anyone who doesn't have a placard or a hanger is parked there, you should speak to whoever is in charge of the polling place, so that they can correct that situation.
Just getting back to Brianna's question quickly. Another benefit of doing the survey on election day, whether it be at your polling place or at others, which we would encourage you to do, and we've never run into any sort of issues with checking out a polling place, which may not be one that the individual who's doing the survey actually votes at. Is that obviously it's going to be set up on that particular day for voting, and a lot of what you're going to be looking for is the accessible route and things like that, and making sure that there's adequate space for a person to be able to maneuver. So that's a benefit. Another benefit is that the poll workers will be there. And in my experience, I found that they can be chatty, and it's not a bad idea to talk to some of the poll workers, because they often have insights, and when they hear that we're doing an accessibility survey, sometimes they'll point things out that you may not notice, that or issues that they've noticed somebody has had in being able to vote themselves independently. And so they can be a really good source of information. You're obviously there for a very contained period of time, but they're there for the entire day, and many of them have been doing this at the same location for many years. So they often will give you some information about accessibility barriers that they've seen, or that or issues that they've seen other people, voters, encounter in their time there, and that can be very helpful.
That's a really interesting question about town meetings. Um, my sort of assumption, sort of educated a point on this is that buildings where town meetings are held should also just be baseline accessible, and should also not encounter these sorts of issues. Hopefully, if people do want to fill out a report on a town meeting that they've had, they're more than welcome to. I would be happy to have the survey also available for that purpose. Um, and yeah, town meetings should also be covered by the same sorts of accessibility rules,
Yeah,
to
just
my
to expand on
knowledge.
that, that is absolutely correct, Emily. So Title II of the ADA would apply because it is a state or local government service program or activity. And so the same general accessibility rules would apply. Um, Keep in mind, that many of the buildings that are used for these functions are old, um, and um, and so there are some rules that are in effect in terms of whether something is relatively new construction versus whether something is older in terms of the physical accessibility. The general rule is that any program that is provided by a state or local government, including town meetings, including voting, um, that the program itself needs to be accessible, and there are times where that might mean moving it to an accessible location, and so that might come into play in terms of town meeting. That the meeting itself would need to be moved to an accessible location if the one that they generally use is not accessible.
Thank you, Tom. And unless there are further questions, I think that wraps things up for us. Thank you all so much for attending this training. We'll hopefully be holding additional trainings in the future on this topic and putting out a broader call for volunteers for folks who weren't able to make this meeting. And to get an official list of people who want to volunteer for this. We'll also be putting up an abbreviated tool for folks who just on day of notice problems at their polling places, but don't have the time to fill out as extensive a survey. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Thank you all very much.